Jake used to have a decent job, but he had to leave it, and now he's a divorced dad making ends meet as a taxi driver. One night, while he's struggling to keep his life on track behind the wheel, he suddenly stops to help a woman and her little girl. He has no idea what's about to happen, but that night turns out to be the beginning of a whole new chapter in Jake's life. Then his phone rings, and everything starts all over again. Welcome to Emotional Lines. As the rain covered the dark streets of the city like a silent curtain, the drops on the windshield of Jake's taxi reflected the turmoil in his mind. He held on tightly to the steering wheel, not just for one more night, but as further proof of how downhill his life was going. Like an old record, Jake's life kept spinning the same sad melody. Gone was the man who had once worked in a prestigious accounting firm and supported his family comfortably. Now, he had become a taxi driver, struggling to make ends meet. His mind was always on his daughter, the little princess who filled his house with her sweet laughter. Now he could only hear that laughter in old videos. His ex-wife had been given custody of his daughter after he separated from his wife, and Jake tried to do everything he could for their sake. But far from feeling enough, he felt like a wreck. Every extra hour he worked, every penny he earned, was hopefully going towards his daughter's future. But these sacrifices only emptied Jake's soul a little more. That night was like any other. He was still behind the wheel after a long day. He had dropped off his last customer, a businessman, looking confident in an expensive suit, at a villa in one of the city's most upscale neighborhoods. As soon as he saw the man's car and his lavish home, a sigh of jealousy swept through him. Jake could be somewhere in that villa. He was hardworking and smart enough to have that lavish life. But life had written a different script for him. As he was about to return to the taxi stand, he noticed a young woman standing on the sidewalk. She was shivering in the rain, a small child clutched tightly in her arms. Her shoulders shook with quiet desperation. Without thinking, Jake pulled the car over and got out quickly. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked. The woman tried to look up at Jake, but her eyes were red from crying. The words seemed to be stuck in her throat. "I'll pick you up and take you home," Jake said without hesitation. She looked surprised, then nodded slightly. Her helplessness was like a silent acceptance. As Jake helped them into the back seat, the little girl looked at him with timid eyes. "Where do you need a ride?" Jake asked. The woman could barely give an address, somewhere well outside the city. No one spoke the whole way. Jake occasionally locked eyes with the woman in the rearview mirror. She held the child in her arms as tightly as if she carried her whole world. She was screaming in the silence. Jake felt it in every cell. When they arrived at the address, the woman, her voice trembling, asked about the debt. Jake shook his head slightly and said, "No, you don't have to pay anything." The woman looked grateful, but it was more a look of shame than gratitude. Something inside Jake ached. Jake got back behind the wheel as they entered the apartment building. It was still raining, but that night he realized that he saw his own pain a little deeper in the pain of this woman and child. Throughout that night, Jake had been brooding in his taxi, having a monologue with each of his passengers about the falsity and injustice of life. Drunken youths leaving nightclubs, people in fancy clothes getting into his car, but carrying emptiness in their hearts. They all had a story behind them, but none of them seemed as complex and hopeless as he did. Or so Jake felt. Late into the night, exhausted, he returned home. It was around 4 in the morning, and the city was getting quiet. He took a shower and tried to shake off some of the fatigue. Then he set about preparing breakfast in his empty kitchen. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. She took a sip of coffee as she watched the sunrise from her window. Just then her phone rang. If you like this part of the story so far, you can be sure that it will get much more interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to Emotional Lines so you don't miss the rest of our story. Now, we are moving towards the unexpected event that changed Jake's life. Who could it be? Jake muttered, suddenly panicked. Did they forget something in the cab? He hurriedly picked up the phone. On the other end of the line was the owner of the taxi stand. "Jake, someone came asking for you tonight," the man said. "I didn't want to give out your phone number right away, but he said I needed to find you." Jake was confused. "He asked for me? Who is this?" he asked curiously. "He seems a bit mysterious," the man added. "I'll give you his number. Do you want to talk to him?" Jake didn't hesitate. "Okay, give it to me," he said. The phone rang a short time later. The voice on the other end of the line was deep and controlled. "Hello. Did you by any chance pick up a woman in a red coat and a little girl in your taxi last night?" the man asked. Jake's face suddenly froze. "Yes," he said quickly. "Did something happen? Are they okay?" The man quickly replied, No, don't worry. I'm their deputy. He's her husband, and she wants to see you. It was not easy to find you. If you are available, I would like to take you to their house today." Jake, confused and a little nervous, gave his address. Then he went downstairs and waited. Soon, a shiny black luxury car pulled into his neighborhood. He usually saw these cars on TV. The driver got out, walked over to Jake, opened the door and said politely, "Please come in." For a moment, Jake wondered what he had gotten himself into. Who were these people? What had the woman and child really been through? He had so many questions as he got in the car and drove off. As the road progressed, his uneasiness turned to confusion. Because their destination was the street where the businessman had left the luxury villas the night before. The driver stopped the car. Jake got out of the car with heavy steps and headed towards the big, stately house. When the door opened, the woman he had seen last night was standing in the doorway. Her eyes were still bulging, but she had a peaceful look on her face. The man next to her turned to Jake and said, "Yes, this man." "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. Jake asked, puzzled. "What happened? Did something happen?" he asked. "This woman is my wife," he said, gratitude in his voice. "Last night before I got home, there was a big disaster. We received threats from some people because of our work. My wife barely got out of the house. I couldn't reach them, but you helped them. If my wife and daughter are safe, it's because of you." Jake didn't know what to say to what the man had said. "I only did what I had to do," he said in a low voice. She thanked Jake once more as she excused herself to go to rest. Adam invited Jake into the large living room. "Let's talk," he said. As Jake hesitantly sat down, the man began to ask questions about Jake. He wanted to know everything from his job to why he was a taxi driver. When Jake shyly told his life story, the man's face turned serious. "It's a great loss to lose someone so selfless and hardworking," he said. Then he said, "If you accept, I would like you to work as an accountant in my company." "It's not easy to find people like that," he added. Jake's eyes widened. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. On the one hand, he was filled with gratitude, but on the other, he wondered if he deserved this chance. Embarrassed, he accepted the offer. Inwardly, for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful that something could turn around in her life. The offer to Jake was real, and it represented the biggest chance of his life. In the early morning hours, the businessman came back to his neighborhood to pick Jake up. As Jake sat inside the luxury vehicle, he still didn't know exactly what to expect. But when they pulled up in front of the huge building in the center of the city, he couldn't believe his eyes. This was a company bigger than he had ever imagined. Adam immediately took Jake to the accounting department. He received a warm welcome from the staff. He was briefed about the job, and Jake was both surprised and delighted. It was a position that was exactly in his area of expertise. The working environment he had been longing for years was now opening a door for him. Jake accepted the offer without hesitation. Adam immediately contacted the Human Resources Department. The hiring process was expedited. Comprehensive insurance, a high salary, and a reassuring work environment. It was a start Jake could only dream of. Everyone at the company treated him kindly and made him feel important and valued. Adam thanked Jake once more and suggested he take a few days off. "You need to recharge your batteries for a fresh start," he motivated him. When Jake heard these words, a hope that he hadn't felt in a long time sprouted inside him. That week, Jake visited his ex-wife and daughter. When he arrived at the door with small gifts for his daughter, he could hardly contain his excitement. His ex-wife was very happy to hear Jake's story. Even though they were divorced, their relationship had always been respectful and friendly. Jake now had the power to see his daughter whenever he wanted. More importantly, he could earn enough money for her future. As Jake drove home that evening, he took a deep breath. Life was starting all over again for him. He now knew what the ripple effect of doing a good deed, of helping someone, could do. Maybe if he hadn't stopped and helped her that night, these doors would never have opened. The ripple effect of kindness is real. When you least expect it, it can change your life forever. If you have listened to the stories so far, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe to Emotional Lines channel and like this video if you liked it. I wish you to overcome all the difficulties in your life with goodness. See you in the next story.